I have with me Ambassador B.S. Prakash. He was the Indian ambassador in Brazil for 4 years, ending in 2012, and he brings considerable insight into the situation in Brazil. Ambassador, why is Brazil important for India?
I think the commonalities between Brazil and India are really remarkable. First of all, we are two large countries, large in the sense of both the size and the population. People don't realize it, but Brazil is the fifth largest population in the world with more than 200 million. Apart from that, very multi-ethnic, multi-racial, a great deal of diversity, disparities like in India between the rich and the poor, regional disparities, and then democracies struggling with poverty. So if you really were to look at the countries in the world, the kind of similarities and commonalities in terms of challenges that we have, it's an extraordinary kind of comparison that can be made between the two countries, though very, very distant in that sense and not all that well known to us.
So when we talk of commonalities,
Yes.
I understand the trade levels are around $6 or $7 billion. Not very big,
That's
but
right.
I also understand we are a major market for Brazil's agricultural produce, and we export quite a bit of pharmaceutical products to Brazil.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I don't think that we are a major market for Brazil's agricultural produce. Brazil is an agricultural superpower. It's a very, very large agricultural exporter. But since we ourselves are a big agricultural producer, and also the kind of things that Brazil sells in the world, sugar, for instance, and then coffee. So there are lots of complementarities. So, and we don't take soya, which is one of Brazil's very big exports, particularly to China, because that's really an animal feed product, and we don't take that. So yes, Brazil is an agricultural superpower, and but we are not such a major market. What we buy from Brazil, what we could potentially buy one day if the equations go in that direction, would be ethanol, which is a byproduct of sugarcane. Yes, but you are right that we sell pharma. Pharma is one of our major exports to Brazil.
So what about defense? I understand that there's a fair amount of defense cooperation that has been picking up over some years.
There is a fair amount of exchanges that have happened, and there's a great deal of interest because, as I said in the very beginning, we are not only similar, but we are a kind of at the same stage of development. Brazil, being a large country, also has defense needs. They have a aircraft industry. In fact, before China started making civilian aircraft, they were the only developing country which produced aircraft, Embraer aircraft, which is civilian aircraft. But in many fields, whether it is the Navy or whether it is defense production, common kinds of needs. But I must say very honestly that it hasn't grown all that much because the bureaucracies in both countries, the inertia in both countries, and our inability to respond sometimes to what Brazil wants and vice versa. So we haven't matched the potential that way.
But that's it. It has remained at a potential.
Yes. Well, it remained a potential, but now with the changes in Brazil, I don't know whether it would even remain a potential because we are now in uncertain times. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So now let's get down to the business of Mr. Bolsonaro. What do you make of him? We've read a lot of fairly right wing stuff about him, what he's done, and what he's promised to do. But what is your reading of this gentleman?
See, as you said, I did 4 years in Brazil from 2008 to 2012. He was not a known name at all. He was a congressman. He was a legislator even then. But I read it now. I mean, of course, it's not. It is not that as an ambassador you come to know all the legislators, but you come to know or at least to hear about the important ones. He was never a name, and he never even figured in the Brazilian media. So his rise to fame and fortune that way is unexpected. And even in Brazil, it's only in the last 6 months or so 1 year that all these things which are being attributed to him, we have come to hear about it. So he really remains uh, a largely unknown figure for most people, except through all these very provocative statements and the views that are now coming out.
It appears to mirror what Donald Trump, also says.
Yes, yes, that's true. In fact, there are a great deal of, and that's why he's being called the Trump of the tropics. And his views on politics, right wing, also in terms of his personal traits and xenophobia. Then really his views on gender, on the less privileged people, all very crude and insensitive. I mean, one has to say that. So he is already a very controversial and dislikable kind of statements he has been making. But Trump was a well-known figure. I mean, as being a major businessman, everybody knew about it. We also knew him as a, from Celebrity Apprentice and stuff like that. Bolsonaro, I think, well, I don't follow Brazil all that closely, but I think he's unknown still.
One of the points about Brazil is the preponderance of China in their market. Do you expect Mr. Bolsonaro to try and limit that in some way, or there is reports that he may try and move closer to the U.S.
Yes, that's right. But there are one or two interesting aspects. Brazil and China have a very, very large trade relationship because they're a natural fit. China has this enormous appetite for everything that Brazil has, which is natural resources, agriculture, mineral, oil, oil also to some extent, but agriculture and mineral. So all of Brazil's agricultural exports, China is a very big market, and so is it for iron ore and for other minerals. So it might be surprising for your audience to know that Brazil is one of the few countries in the world which has a trade surplus with China. Actually, it's a $55 billion trade, or even more than that, $80 billion trade. But Brazil has a trade surplus because whatever Brazil has to sell, China can buy. And of course, China is the shop floor, I mean, is the manufacturing hub for the whole world. So China sells all its manufactures in Brazil, all its agricultural resources. So it's a very large relationship. And there are many other uh, factors which make the two economies which have come together. But you're absolutely right that Bolsonaro said during this election campaign that they should be a little wary of China. One famous statement that he said, which has been picked up by the media a lot, he said China is not buying in Brazil, it is buying Brazil. And when he says you're buying Brazil, that sings alarm bells. So what it meant was that they're capturing infrastructure, strategic industries, maybe are even interested in the land, and all this is very, very alarming for Brazil, particularly if somebody wants to invest in or buy the Amazonian forest. These are very important for Brazil. So he seems to have included that wariness about China. Uh, and he, I think, has made his pro-American interests very known, well known. Now, in Brazil, there has always been a pro-American. There was always a pro-American. I mean, American companies were very big in Brazil 12, 15 years ago. I mean, all of Latin America was close to America in that sense. They were big American corporations. But under the previous governments, which were leftist government, the Workers' Party governments, under Lula, and so on, I think Brazil diversified, it became a developing country, it had a different profile, and its closeness to China increased a lot. So this is a big issue. We will have to see how it is go. But I think what you said, the hunch that he may kind of wants to devalue that relationship with China and also go closer to US may be true. We will have to see. And at the same time, it comes at a time when the US has made it known that it doesn't want Chinese influence to expand, and the US will try to fight for its, imprint, a larger imprint in South America. So that will be a big issue to watch.
Some of the comments from Bolsonaro suggest that he is a fan of military rule. And he was, in fact, a captain during those years when there was a military junta in Brazil. Do you think there could be some kind of a little more movement towards the authoritarian in Brazil?
Again, there are one or two factors which makes that a plausible. I won't say scenario as yet, but one has to think about it. The most important thing is that the law and order situation in Brazil has become very bad. It always used to be bad in big cities like Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo. In fact, there was a great deal of urban violence, and but since from what I read in the last few years, particularly after the Olympics and the World Cup and all. So, in the years after 2014, I believe this has worsened considerably. I read a figure that the number of murders in Brazil in 1 year was 67,000. That's a shocking number. So, if there is that kind of a breakdown of law and order, then the ordinary people, plus Brazil has an elite. It has a elite in cities, just as we do. They are absolutely scandalized by this kind of breakdown of law and order, and they want a more authoritarian, if not the military rule. So that's one. Second, Bolsonaro, as you said, has been an ex-army man, and his running mate, I mean, the person who he choose for the vice president is again a retired general, and he has been hobnobbing with some of the generals. So all this leads to a kind of a view that will they come back? The military last left power in 1985. So after let's say a little over more than 20 years, will they come back? My own reading is that the military showed no signs of being ambitious or wanting to stage a coup, not during during my time, not during recent years also. But a stronger military plus police control of the cities and a stronger role for the military is possible. Is possible. I think that's as far as one can go. Because also democracy is fairly well rooted. You know, the Brazilians are spirited people, and as I said, it's very diverse. It's a dynamic society, so they won't all kind of fold up, and it won't be easy to impose that kind of an authoritarian rule. But there may be chances for a stronger government, shall we say.
So I think Brazil is in for interesting times ahead, and let's see whether our trade with them picks up, and our stakes in that country and their stakes in ours also goes up. Ambassador,
Conclude on that chart thought, if we are concluding, I would like to say that we need to look at much more than trade. You know, because with Brazil, it's much more than trade. It is also political values, democracy, diversity, development, all that. It is a kind of coming together in BRICS, which was a major institution. BRICS was all these countries, emerging economies coming together. We came together as candidates for the permanent membership of the Security Council, Brazil, India, Japan, and Germany. It's called the G4. So there were many multilateral platforms and agendas that we forged with Brazil during Lula's time. I mean, these were also the years when I was when I was the ambassador. So we will have to see whether we can continue with some of those big issues going beyond trade, kind of, as you mentioned, the defense cooperation, economic cooperation, finance, all these. Because trade, given the distance, given the complementarity, is one thing, but there are other agendas which we need to also forge.
Ambassador Prakash, thank you very much for that insight, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.